What if the echoes of World War I resonated not only across continental Europe, but also set the stage for a fierce struggle on the shores of Ireland? Welcome to a riveting journey through the Irish Wars of 1990 to 1923, where the aftermath of WWI ignited a revolutionary spark in a nation determined to claim its freedom. In this episode of our documentary series, we'll traverse battle-scarred landscapes, witness the emergence of legendary figures, and unearth the unbreakable resolve that shaped Ireland's destiny. Stay tuned to discover how a small island nation found itself locked in a tumultuous fight that would redefine its future and influence the global conversation on independence for generations to come. Hello, and welcome to our in-depth exploration of the Irish Wars of 1919 to 1923. In this comprehensive documentary, we delve into a critical period that reshaped Ireland's political and cultural identity. This saga unfolds immediately after the crucible of the First World War, 1914 to 1918, also known as the Great War, or WWI, which devastated Europe and left scars on global politics that were slow to heal. While the thunder of artillery on the Western Front may have ceased, the spirit of revolution did not fade, especially in the fertile ground of Irish aspirations for independence. In many ways, the conclusion of WWI was only the starting point for the struggles to come in Ireland. The end of the Great War, a period sometimes referred to as the Interwar Period or interbellum, spurred a fresh wave of nationalist fervor in multiple countries. Echoes of the Russian Civil War and the aftershocks of upheavals across Europe also fueled local revolutions. Ireland was no exception. For centuries, Ireland had resisted British rule, with numerous uprisings, rebellions, and political movements. Yet, from 1919 to 1923, those efforts culminated in two distinct but intimately connected conflicts: the Irish War of Independence and the Irish Civil War. Why does this period matter? This was a time that would see the birth of a new political entity, the Irish Free State, and the partition of the island between the predominantly Unionist northern counties and the rest of Ireland. This era introduced global audiences to figures such as Michael Collins, Eamon de Valera, and many others whose names have become legendary in the annals of revolutionary history. Their actions and decisions shaped not only the course of Ireland's destiny, but also had a ripple effect on other nations yearning for self-determination. In this extensive documentary series-style script, we aim to reveal both the glories and tragedies of the Irish struggle for autonomy. You'll hear about clandestine meetings, high-stakes negotiations, guerrilla tactics, and tragic betrayals. With each step, we hope to provide an educational journey into a vibrant period of change, connecting it to the broader narrative of post-WWI turmoil and the evolving face of European geopolitics. From the vantage point of the 1920s, Ireland found itself at the intersection of global trends: the disintegration of empires, the rise of democratic ideals, and the fractious challenges of new national boundaries. Through it all, the Irish people showcased extraordinary resilience, forming volunteer armies, establishing alternative institutions, and pushing the boundaries of what was possible for a small nation within the British Empire. By peeling back the layers of these epical events, through the War of Independence and the subsequent Civil War, we can glean important lessons about unity, division, and the complexities of forging a fledgling nation. Join us as we chronicle an extraordinary narrative of hope, conflict, and the quest for identity. Whether you're a seasoned history buff or new to the subject, prepare to be enthralled by this dramatic story of a determined people fighting for their place in the post-World War I world. The roots of the Irish struggle for independence run deep, stretching back centuries to a history replete with rebellions such as the 1798 Rising, the 1803 Robert Emmet Rebellion, and the 1848 Young Ireland Movement. However, for our immediate focus on the years 1919 to 1923, much of the catalyst lies in the political and cultural awakening that took shape in the decades leading up to World War I. Organizations like the Gaelic League aimed to rejuvenate the Irish language and heritage, while political groups such as Sinn Féin championed the ideal of self-governance. The Easter Rising of 1916 stands out as a watershed moment in this build-up. Though the uprising was quickly suppressed by British forces, the subsequent execution of its leaders swung public opinion in Ireland toward more radical calls for independence. Figures like Patrick Pearse, James Connolly, and Tom Clark became martyrs, galvanizing public sentiment. While many Irishmen had volunteered for service in WWI, believing it might lead to concessions from Britain, the post-war context revealed a different reality. Frustration grew as promises of home rule were delayed or introduced with caveats. In the aftermath of the Great War, which had seen the colossal shifting of empires and a wave of revolutionary fervor sweep Europe, it became evident to Irish nationalists that peaceful advocacy alone might not achieve their goals. The global stage was rife with movements of national self-determination. This was the same era that shaped the fate of nations from Eastern Europe to the Middle East. Encouraged by these global changes and the rhetoric of President Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, which championed the rights of peoples to determine their own futures, Irish nationalists believed their time had arrived. Simultaneously, a clandestine revolution was brewing. Men and women who were part of the Irish Volunteers, later to become the Irish Republican Army, IRA, trained and coordinated, often under cover of darkness. Their strategy included targeted ambushes, boycotts of British institutions, and the establishment of parallel governance structures such as Dáil Éireann, the revolutionary parliament. This dual system of authority would become a defining feature of the War of Independence. Yet, discontent went both ways. Unionists, predominantly in the North, rallied to maintain the union with Britain. They formed their own paramilitary groups, such as the Ulster Volunteers, determined to counter any moves that might separate them from the Crown. Tensions simmered across the island, setting the stage for a confrontation that seemed all but inevitable. On January 21, 1919, the War of Independence effectively began with the Solo Headbeg ambush in County Tipperary. On the same day, Sinn Féin MPs, who had won a sweeping victory in the 1918 general election but refused to take their seats at Westminster, convened the First Dáil in Dublin, declaring Ireland a sovereign republic. This act was revolutionary, not just symbolically but practically, as it signaled that Irish political leadership was going to operate outside British structures. In this new phase of conflict, the Irish Republican Army, under the leadership of figures like Richard Mulcahy, Cathal Brugha, and eventually Michael Collins, adopted a strategy of guerrilla warfare, striking swiftly and retreating into the support networks of rural communities. The IRA found a measure of success in harassing the Royal Irish Constabulary, RIS, and the British administration. Ambushes, raids on police barracks, and intelligence-gathering efforts became routine. Michael Collins, in particular, proved to be a mastermind of intelligence. He orchestrated a spy network that infiltrated key British institutions, allowing the IRA to preempt raids and planned crackdowns. As the British government struggled to contain the unrest, it deployed the infamous Black and Tans, auxiliary forces recruited primarily from British WWI veterans. Their harsh tactics Retaliatory burnings of villages and reprisals against civilians only deepened animosity among the local populace. Despite the asymmetry in resources and manpower, the IRA's ability to strike and vanish made it a formidable opponent. In urban centers like Dublin and Cork, as well as across the countryside, the concept of active resistance took hold. Women played a crucial role too. Members of Cumann Namban supported the fighting men by smuggling arms, delivering messages, and running safe houses. The sense of national unity in many communities was palpable, even if not universally shared. However, the War of Independence wasn't purely a military affair. The Dáil set out to govern through its own departments: finance, local government, foreign affairs, and so on. Underground courts replaced British ones in many areas, and a national loan was raised, albeit covertly, to fund the new republic. These actions highlighted that the conflict was as much about asserting a functioning state as it was about armed struggle. International opinion also mattered. Figures like Eamon de Valera traveled overseas to gain diplomatic support. Although recognition of the Irish Republic was not forthcoming from major powers, sympathy for the Irish cause grew, particularly among the diaspora communities in the United States. By 1921, the war had reached a stalemate. Both sides faced enormous pressure. The British government struggled to justify the mounting costs and international criticism, while the Irish Republicans wrestled with limited resources and the hardships of sustaining prolonged guerrilla warfare. Ultimately, a truce was declared on July 11, 1921, paving the way for negotiations in London. The negotiations that followed the truce were marked by intense pressure and high stakes. The Irish delegation, led by Arthur Griffith and Michael Collins, found themselves in the lion's den of British politics. Meanwhile, Eamon de Valera stayed in Dublin, a decision that would later become a subject of controversy. Over the course of weeks, the Irish negotiators wrestled with Britain's insistence on some form of dominion status rather than an outright republic. In December 1921, the Anglo-Irish Treaty was signed. Under its terms, Ireland would become the Irish Free State, a self-governing dominion within the British Commonwealth, with the King as head of state. The treaty also allowed Northern Ireland, which had been given its own parliament under the Government of Ireland Act 1920, to opt out of the Free State, which it promptly did. Another bitter pill was the oath of allegiance that Irish parliamentarians would have to swear to the Crown. For Collins, this was a compromise, a stepping stone to full independence over time. Nonetheless, the treaty's terms were deeply polarizing. In Ireland, public opinion was sharply divided. While many saw it as the best deal possible under the circumstances, others regarded it as a betrayal of the Republic declared in 1916 and 1919. When the Dáil debated the treaty, the split was painfully evident. A narrow majority approved it, but the dissenting voices included Eamon de Valera. The anti-treaty side argued that any allegiance to the British Crown, even symbolic, was unacceptable. On the other hand, pro-treaty supporters contended that securing an internationally recognized free state was a monumental achievement, something that had never seemed possible before. This fracture was not just a matter of political wrangling. It struck at the heart of personal loyalties, friendships, and the revolutionary comradeship forged in the War of Independence. The stage was set for a bitter internal conflict. With the treaty ratified, the provisional government under Michael Collins sought to implement the transition to the Irish Free State. However, anti-treaty forces refused to accept the new political arrangement. They saw any acceptance of British sovereignty, even in a limited or symbolic form, as a betrayal of the Republic's ideals. Tensions boiled over in June 1922 when pro-treaty forces bombarded the Four Courts in Dublin, which had been occupied by anti-treaty IRA units. Thus, the Irish Civil War began. On one side were the National Army pro-treaty forces, led by individuals like Collins, Richard Mulcahy, and W.T. Cosgrave. On the other side were the anti-treaty IRA, led by figures such as Liam Lynch, Rory O'Connor, and Eamon de Valera in a political capacity. What followed was a tragic and fratricidal conflict, with former comrades turning their guns on each other. The fighting raged primarily in Dublin and the southern counties. The National Army, equipped with better resources, including arms from Britain as part of the treaty agreements, quickly secured the major cities. However, the anti-treaty forces adopted guerrilla tactics, mirroring what they had done against the British. Towns changed hands, ambushes were frequent, and harsh reprisals echoed the recent past. One of the Civil War's most poignant moments was the death of Michael Collins in August 1922 during an ambush at Béal na Bláth. Collins's loss was devastating for the pro-treaty side. He had been not only a military strategist, but also a charismatic leader capable of inspiring loyalty. Nonetheless, the National Army pressed on, consolidating control. By early 1923, the anti-treaty side was fragmented and lacked coherent leadership, especially after Liam Lynch was killed in April 1923. In May 1923, Eamon de Valera issued a directive to cease hostilities, effectively ending the Civil War. The scars, however, would linger for generations. Thousands had died, including many prominent revolutionaries. Families were torn apart, and the sense of solidarity forged against the British was replaced by lingering bitterness. The outcome of these tumultuous years was the establishment of the Irish Free State, a dominion within the British Commonwealth. Over time, the Free State would evolve, shedding many vestiges of British influence. In 1937, under a new constitution largely orchestrated by de Valera, who had since returned to a position of leadership, Ireland became Éire, further solidifying its sovereignty. By 1949, it would formally become the Republic of Ireland, severing its last ties to the British monarchy. Nevertheless, the partition of the island into Northern Ireland and the Irish Free State, later the Republic of Ireland, laid the groundwork for decades of tension and conflict, most notably the Troubles of the late 20th century. The Civil War's legacy also shaped domestic politics. The two main political parties that eventually emerged, Fianna Fáil, associated with the anti-treaty side, and Fine Gael, rooted in the pro-treaty tradition, dominated Irish politics for much of the 20th century. Their origins in the Civil War defined allegiances, policies, and voter loyalties for decades. For a global audience, the Irish Wars of 1910 serve as an educational case study in how a nation transitions from colonial rule to sovereignty and the perils that can accompany that transition. The interplay of armed rebellion, diplomatic negotiation, and internal fractures underscores the complexity of revolutionary movements everywhere. This story echoes across history, paralleling aspects of other struggles for independence, be it in the context of the Russian Civil War or the broader interwar period revolutions. The period also highlights themes of identity, sacrifice, and the sometimes contradictory paths nations take to achieve self-determination. Whether one regards the treaty as a pragmatic step or a betrayal, the undeniable truth is that these events shaped modern Ireland. Today, Ireland's rich culture, global diaspora, and role on the international stage are testaments to the resilience and determination forged during those formative years. To truly understand the Irish Wars of 1919 to 1923, one must look at both their immediate and long-range consequences. The victory of the pro-treaty forces initially cemented a conservative, Catholic-influenced governance in the Free State. Over the following decades, Ireland's economy and society underwent considerable changes. Emigration, a historical reality for the Irish, continued, but the Free State government also invested in developing industry and agriculture under challenging conditions. Politically, the bitterness of the Civil War manifested in the Dáil through sharp debates and shifting coalitions. Former comrades in arms sat on opposite sides of the parliamentary floor, each bearing the traumas of a war that literally pitted brother against brother. Yet over time, these political adversaries found ways to work within the system to shape Ireland's destiny. The presence of the Oath of Allegiance, a symbolic flashpoint in 1922, was ultimately removed in 1932. Meanwhile, the North remained part of the United Kingdom, with a separate parliament at Stormont. While civil war did not erupt there in the same manner, the underlying sectarian tensions between unionist and nationalist communities would fester. The ramifications contributed to the troubles that began in the late 1960s, a conflict that would last until the Good Friday Agreement of 1998. Hence, the battles from 1919 to 1923 cast a long shadow on the island's future. From an international standpoint, Ireland's experience demonstrated the complexities of transitioning from a colony to a dominion and then to full sovereignty. This was an era that saw nations grappling with the redrawn maps of Europe post-WWI. Countries from Poland to the Baltic states were forging or reforging their identities, often while dealing with external pressures. Ireland's success in securing a treaty, flawed as it might have been perceived, was a notable achievement in an age when empires were still dominant. Culturally, this period fostered a renaissance in Irish literature, drama, and art. Writers and intellectuals, long stifled by colonial constraints, found inspiration in the resilience of the people and the cause of independence. The Irish language, bolstered by the Gaelic League, experienced a revival in educational curricula. Monuments, commemorations, and an evolving historical narrative helped shape Irish national consciousness, ensuring that the sacrifices made in the War of Independence and the Civil War would not be forgotten. In reflecting on the Irish Wars of 1919 to 1923, one cannot help but acknowledge the immense sacrifice, courage, and heartbreak that defined this era. Emerging from the First World War, Ireland stood at a crossroads, torn between centuries-old aspirations for self-rule and the daunting might of the British Empire. In a testament to the era's revolutionary spirit, mirroring the Russian Civil War, the broader Interwar Period, and numerous global calls for autonomy, the Irish people waged a two-pronged fight, first against external rule, then among themselves over the terms of independence. The result was the Irish Free State, a dominion that would, over the course of a few decades, evolve into a fully independent republic. The Civil War's wounds, however, were slow to heal. Families were divided, political parties formed along old battle lines, and the question of the partition remained a persistent challenge. Yet, out of these trials, modern Ireland emerged, forging its destiny through resilience, cultural revival, and a determination to find unity in the midst of difference. As we draw our documentary to a close, let us not forget that history is a living tapestry. The events of 1919 to 1923 continue to shape Ireland's political discourse, its cultural identity, and its role on the world stage. By remembering the lessons of the Irish Wars, we gain a clearer perspective on the price of freedom and the necessity of forging a shared future, even after the trauma of armed conflict. Thank you for joining us on this in-depth journey into Ireland's past. We hope this exploration provides greater insight into how a nation's identity is both won and tested under the harshest of circumstances. Thank you for watching this installment of our documentary series on the Untold Irish Wars, 1919 to 1923. If you found this deep dive into Ireland's struggle for independence informative, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and ring that notification bell so you never miss another historical exploration. Feel free to share your thoughts or family stories related to this period in the comments below. Your insights and questions help keep this history alive. Remember to stay curious and keep exploring the incredible tapestry of world events that have shaped our present. See you in the next episode.